Coming up on New Day at Arirang, South Korea is expected to report new infections above the 5,000 mark once again Thursday. All the more concerning is that authorities confirmed 5 cases of the Omicron variant in the country. Seoul's National Security Advisor Seo-hoon will be sitting down with a senior Chinese diplomat Thursday to discuss Seoul's push for an end-of-war declaration, as well as a possible visit to South Korea by Chinese President Xi Jinping. And South Korea and the U.S. will hold their annual security consultative meeting in Seoul later today. South Korea's Defense Minister Seo and his U.S. counterpart, Lloyd Austin, are likely to discuss the transfer of wartime operational control and address North Korea and various alliance issues.
Hello and welcome to this Thursday edition of New Day at Arirang. It's 8 a.m. on December 2nd here in Seoul, South Korea. Thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Broom.
And I'm Kim Mo-gyan. Over the next hour, we'll take a look at the big news stories of the day and get expert insights on the issues facing Korea and the world.
We start, though, with the latest on the coronavirus situation in South Korea. The country continues to set grim milestone after milestone, day after day, as daily COVID-19 infections are skyrocketing right now. Adding to concerns is the confirmation of the first cases of the Omicron variant in the country.
For more on this and other related updates, joining us in our studio is our reporter Choi Min-jung. Good morning, Min-jung.
Good morning.
So let's start with today's figures. Are we expecting another high today?
Well, we did see another record high number of infections from midnight to 9 p.m. yesterday. Given that South Korea reported more than 4,300 cases in that period, we are expecting to see cases hover around the 5,000 mark once again. This is also a jump of 460 cases over the same time from the day before. What's also troubling is the increasing fatality rate. If you compare the data from August and November, the risk of dying from COVID-19 nearly tripled from 0.36 to 0.93%. This comes despite 80% of the total population now being fully vaccinated against the virus.
Yeah, that's a concerning statistic, the death rate going up, but making matters even more concerning, potentially, until we know more about this new variant, is the Omicron strain is now confirmed to be here in South Korea.
That's right. Authorities confirmed 5 cases of the Omicron variant on Wednesday. A married couple in their 40s contracted the variant after visiting Nigeria in mid-November. Their friend was also infected with the variant, and the results of their son, who is suspected to be infected as well, will come out on Thursday. Health officials are on high alert as the couple was fully vaccinated with the Moderna vaccine back in October, making them exempt from self-quarantine after arriving in Korea. Meanwhile, their friend and son were in quarantine after making contact with the couple, as neither of them had been vaccinated. Officials say that the couple and their friend are experiencing no specific symptoms other than respiratory symptoms and muscle pain. Apart from the 3, 2 more people have been confirmed to have been infected with the Omicron variant. The variant was detected in 2 unvaccinated women in their 50s living in Gyeonggi-do province. They also traveled to Nigeria in mid-November and are now being treated at their homes. Besides the 5 who tested positive for the variant, there is a total of 4 more suspected cases waiting for results. But what's most concerning is that this may be the start of a potential 5th wave. Over the past month, some 5,000 people entered South Korea from Africa and Europe, where the mutation is spreading quickly. Experts say transmissions of the mutated strain may also have already begun to spread in the local community.
So the situation seems to be getting more serious by the day. So Min-jung, how is the South Korean government dealing with this? How are they coping with to contain the situation? And I heard that there were new measures that were introduced.
That's right. All travelers arriving in Korea, regardless of their nationality and their vaccination status, will have to quarantine for 10 days. The new measure will be implemented on Friday and last for the next 2 weeks. Koreans and foreigners living in Korea must go through self-quarantine at home and get PCR tests 3 times, once before arrival, another after arrival, and finally once before being released from quarantine. Foreigners who are visiting short-term will be quarantined in temporary facilities provided by the government. And also starting Friday, the entry of non-Koreans departing from Nigeria will be banned. But Koreans and foreigners who are staying long-term will be permitted to enter the country and will be required to quarantine at temporary facilities for 10 days. And they also have to take 4 PCR tests. The same measures had already been put in place for 8 other countries, including South Africa. The government has already decided to suspend direct flights from Ethiopia for 2 weeks starting Saturday, but the country will be organizing separate flights for the safe return of South Korean nationals. And on top of that, those who have come into contact with a patient infected with the Omicron variant will be required to self-quarantine for 14 days, and there is no exception for the fully vaccinated people. Currently, fully inoculated people are not required to quarantine even after making close contact with a COVID-19 patient.
Let's hope the measures could be helpful. Now, Min-jung, thank you so much for your report. We'll talk to you again tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, as evidence builds to show the new variant of COVID-19 is highly contagious, the World Health Organization has confirmed that the strain has now been detected in 23 different countries.
The rapid spread of Omicron has triggered tougher border controls in many parts of the world. Kim Hyo-san tells us more.
The WHO says the Omicron variant has now been identified in around 24 countries. The head of the WHO spoke on Wednesday about the spread.
The emergence of the Omicron variant has understandably captured global attention. At least 23 countries from 5 of 6 WHO regions have now reported cases of Omicron, and we expect that number to grow. WHO takes this development extremely seriously, and so should every country. But it should not surprise us.
The WHO chief also said more information is being collected about the new strain. Despite mounting uncertainties around Omicron, Ghebreyesus called for people to get vaccinated as the shots help save lives. Japan announced Wednesday that it had confirmed its second case of the Omicron variant, prompting Tokyo to implement tougher travel restrictions. The Japanese government will deny entry to all foreigners from 10 African countries feared to have outbreaks of the variant, including South Africa. It also asked airlines to stop taking reservations for inbound international flights, meaning all Japanese citizens and foreign residents will not be allowed to enter the country. Japan says the measures will remain in place for the time being. In Europe, at least 11 countries have confirmed Omicron cases, with the European Commission president saying the EU needs to, quote, hope for the best and prepare for the worst.
Therefore, till we know what's going on, and this will take 2 to 3 weeks, that scientists tell us, we have to do everything possible to make the best out of the time we have till we have certainty about the characteristics of transmissibility and severity of Omicron.
As of Wednesday, 59 cases of the new variant had been identified among EU member states, with most of them having recently been in southern Africa. The U.S. has also reported its first case of the new strain. The infected person is a fully vaccinated traveler who returned to California from South Africa on November 22nd. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention added that no other potential Omicron cases are being investigated, and all close contacts of the infected person had tested negative. Kim Hyo-san, Arirang News.
The World Health Organization says the COVID-19 vaccines we currently have could be effective in preventing severe cases of the Omicron variant. The WHO's chief scientist, Soma Swaminathan, said Wednesday that vaccines are likely to provide some protection against the variant, although more research has to be done. That result is likely within days, according to the WHO's technical lead on COVID-19. The official said it could be possible the Omicron variant is more transmissible than the dominant Delta, but it's still unclear whether Omicron makes people more sick.
Now, we're going to move on to On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into the biggest news stories in the spotlight right now. So, we all know the story by now. A matter of days after being detected in South Africa, new cases of this potentially more contagious Omicron variant of COVID-19 now being reported in more and more countries. The latest count around 23, and just a new case found in the United States as well, that happening in California. While there is still a lot of research that needs to be done, there are concerns the new variant could be more resistant to the vaccines currently available to us. For now, at least, this strain, unfortunately for the great many of us, has poured cold water on our hopes that the pandemic and associated antivirus restrictions would be winding down, as they kind of had been doing.
Many nations have imposed travel restrictions on flights from southern Africa or shut their borders altogether as they try to buy time before we know more information about Omicron. For more, we are joined by Ben Cowling, Chair Professor of Epidemiology at the University of Hong Kong. Good morning, Professor.
Good morning.
Now, the WHO has deemed this strain a variant of concern. And with the data that's currently available, what do we know about Omicron in terms of its transmissibility, reinfection potential, and antibody resistance, and its susceptibility to vaccines?
The characteristics of the virus itself have already been quite widely reported. It has a lot of additional mutations on the head of the spike protein of the virus, which is going to allow the virus to infect people that might have had immunity against other strains of COVID, for example, immunity against the original virus or the Delta variant, whether that immunity has come from being vaccinated or being infected. The Omicron variant looks like it's going to be able to evade that immunity to some extent, but people who've been vaccinated or people who've previously been infected should still have some degree of immunity against severe disease, meaning that at the population level, the Omicron variant may not cause a lot of severe disease, but it probably will cause infections if it's allowed to spread. But we're still waiting for more information on exactly how transmissible it is compared to, say, the Delta variant, and exactly how serious the infections might be compared to the Delta variant. And I think we can't say too much about that right now.
Right, well, we don't know very much at this current time, but many studies have shown that over time, generally speaking, even the most dangerous of pathogens mutate so much, as we're seeing with COVID-19 now, that eventually they just become weaker and weaker and weaker until they're nothing more really than a common virus. Now, lots of people are hanging their hopes on that being the case here. However, how likely do you think it might go the other way, that COVID-19 could become more transmissible and more deadly?
Well, viruses could go in either direction, and I'm not sure it's the case that viruses will always tend to become more mild. But what I think we can say, and what I think will happen with COVID, is that as time goes on, as more and more people get vaccinated, get infected, in some cases more than once, infections will tend to become milder and milder. We know that infection in a vaccinated person is milder than infection in an unvaccinated person. We also know that a reinfection in someone who previously got infected already some time ago, a reinfection is milder than the first time infection. And what I would expect is, as time goes on, COVID infections become generally milder. And so we might think the virus is weakening, but actually it's about the same. It's actually our immune systems which have got better. It's the population immunity which has got stronger against the virus. And so the infections tend to resemble milder illnesses on average, rather than what they used to be. And so I can imagine a scenario, for example, in 10 years' time, in Korea, or where I am in Hong Kong, we have COVID in the community, and it tends to be like a common cold infection. It doesn't tend to cause very much severe disease anymore. But then the virus gets in, the same exact virus gets into a community in the Amazon jungle where they haven't had it before because they're so isolated, and it causes a lot of severe disease. It's the same virus, but in places that have the experience with it, immunity from vaccines, or less desirably from infections repeatedly. In those scenarios, with that exposure, then the virus would tend to have to be able to cause weaker illnesses on average.
And Professor, the Delta variant has been the most common strain of COVID-19 in recent months. It might be the case that Omicron takes its place. When this occurs, what happens to previous variants? For instance, we rarely hear people contracting the original Alpha strain anymore.
Yeah, so in South Africa, they had a large epidemic of the Delta variant a few months ago, which was already coming to an end by the end of October. And it looks like in South Africa, they'd reached herd immunity against the Delta variant. So there was very little Delta variant circulating. Now they're having this increase in numbers of cases with the Omicron variant. And so in South Africa, it looks like Omicron's going to replace Delta very soon as the most common variant being identified. In other parts of the world where Delta is still causing a lot of infections, we'll have to see whether Omicron is able to successfully compete and even displace Delta as the most common variant. There's a lot of issues at play there, depending on transmissibility and the potential to evade immunity. But ultimately, the virus will keep moving. And so in some years' time, we'll have other variants that come in, and the earlier variants will disappear. As you mentioned, alphas disappeared, betas disappeared, gammas disappeared, largely speaking, and eventually Delta will disappear. Eventually, Omicron will disappear, and we'll have future variants taking their place.
So while we await more information about Omicron, many governments have thrown caution to the wind, and some, I believe it's still the case for Israel, but we have reported that it's certainly the case for Japan, have locked down their borders. In Japan's case, even for Japanese people outside Japan wanting to return home. I wanted to ask you whether these border closures actually work to keep these strains out. And secondly, if you were to be asked by a national government for your advice, what would you suggest they do at this time?
I think we have to be very cautious about border closures because, for example, in Japan, if the infection has already reached into the community and is slowly spreading, maybe hasn't been recognized yet in different parts of the country, then closing the borders really won't actually have much effect on the ultimate numbers of cases of Omicron, say in 1 month's time or 2 months' time or 3 months' time, because the seeding has already begun. There's already most likely infections in the community. Now, if we could go back in time and close the borders of a country before there was any seeding whatsoever and completely close them, then that will buy time. But that's a very drastic measure, and it has a lot of other implications. Many people do want to travel. Many people need to travel. And so that's why the World Health Organization are really discouraging those kind of measures. And I think what we've seen in other parts of the world, which is less drastic, is maybe targeting certain countries to say that maybe travelers from South Africa have to do quarantine, but travelers from elsewhere maybe don't need to. And that's really a very limited measure, a measure of very limited value, because we know that Omicron is being found in other parts of the world fairly soon. The Omicron could come through a third country. So even if it doesn't get into your country from South Africa, it could come in via Europe or via the United States. And then ultimately you have to think about having the restrictions for all inbound travelers. And then when we think ahead to what's the situation going to be like in 2 months' time or 3 months' time, the travel restrictions that are put in place now are not going to make all that much difference. So they could buy you a week or 2 weeks to learn more information and to have a better plan. But ultimately, there's not that much that we can do to stop the global spread, unless, like where I am in Hong Kong and in China, we're planning to have long-term measures to keep any kind of virus out of the community. But these measures are also, of course, very costly and disruptive.
And Professor Cowling, with the spread of Omicron, will all eyes are now on like pharmaceutical companies on when will they ever be able to develop treatments or vaccines that could cure Omicron? Do you have any idea on this? Yeah,
so it's early days, but it's most likely that the antiviral drugs, there was news recently from I think Merck and Pfizer have antiviral drugs. Most likely those will still work against the Omicron variant, but we'll have to wait. Time will tell. But there's no reason that they wouldn't. On the other hand, with vaccines, I think for the mRNA vaccines, those are the ones that could be updated the quickest, and it would take 3 to 4 months until updated versions of those vaccines, the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine, are available. And I don't know if we'll have them in Asia as quickly as maybe the United States or Europe will have those updated vaccines. So one of the possible strategies for some countries would be to try and slow Omicron down as much as possible to buy time until those vaccines are available and then use them as booster doses. But I don't know when, for example, millions of booster doses of Omicron Pfizer or Omicron Moderna vaccine would be available somewhere like Korea, and it could be 6 months or longer, I suppose. So I think.
Hello.
Sorry.
Can you hear us?
So yeah, I can hear you. Sorry, there was something in my ear. Sorry. So sorry, lost my train of thought. So I think it's probably too long, and most likely we're going to have to rely on booster doses, third doses of the current vaccines to be available in order to combat at least the early spread of the Omicron variant. Sorry.
No problem at all. So I was reading reports this morning. I know we don't know for sure, but as far as I know, looking at the reporting that's out there, I believe no one has actually died of the Omicron variant. Is that correct?
It's still early days. So if you remember in the past, when we're tracking the progress of epidemics, we know there's delays, and we tend to see rises in cases first, and then maybe 2 weeks later, we start to see rises in hospitalizations. And then a week after that, we start to see rises in deaths. And in South Africa, we have to be particularly cautious about interpreting the situation there, because they've had 3 large epidemics in the last 2 years. First with the original virus, and then with the Beta variant in South Africa, and then most recently with the Delta variant. And most people in South Africa have actually been infected, in some cases, more than once. And so when there's a high level of population immunity in a place like South Africa, even if the Omicron variant seems like it's causing mild infections there, it could just be because of that historical immunity that's been built up over multiple waves of infection, with most people getting natural infections, in some cases more than once, and a relatively low vaccine coverage. And so that the severity may be different in other parts of the world where there's not such a high level of particularly natural immunity from natural infections.
And Professor, I must ask, like in the early days of this spread of this Omicron variant, it seems like the spread was evident especially in Europe. Do we have any specific reason for this?
I don't think so. I think we need to look at the travel links between different places, and also the capacity for surveillance. So I'm a little bit surprised that in the United States, they've only reported 1 case, because here in Hong Kong, we've already detected 2 cases of the Omicron variant, and we don't have an awful lot of people coming into Hong Kong. We only have about 500 people arriving every day, and not very many from South Africa or the southern parts of Africa. So if we've seen 2, I imagine there's been a lot of people traveling to Europe and the United States and other parts of the world from that area of the world with the Omicron variant. And so for there only to be 1 detected case in the US, I wonder if fairly soon they'll start to pick up more cases and realize that maybe there were more than they'd known about.
And you're in Hong Kong, and so very densely populated place, of course. How is Hong Kong dealing with this situation?
So we've been blacklisted by Switzerland and a number of other countries because we have detected Omicron cases. But in Hong Kong, we still have our very strict zero COVID approach. So we don't have any cases in our community as far as we know. We're picking up a lot of cases at the border because everyone who comes into Hong Kong needs to do a quarantine in a hotel for maybe 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and they're tested, and we pick up cases every day, including cases of the Omicron variant. So we don't have any cases as far as we know in the city of Hong Kong. So you're right, it's very densely populated, and if or when the virus does get into the community, it's going to be able to spread pretty easily, and it has done in the past. But for now, things are calm, things are quiet, and we're just continuing with this measure of the zero COVID approach the same as in mainland China. In Hong Kong, we have hopes that we can establish a travel bubble with the mainland so we can travel without quarantine into China, and people from mainland China can come across the border into Hong Kong without quarantine. And then we'll stay here in our bubble without any COVID in the community until something maybe changes in the future, which we're not sure about. So the question that I and many others have is what's our exit strategy? Because although it's really a big advantage for public health not to have COVID in the community, at the same time, the travel measures and the potential disruption of outbreak control measures, that they're still there. And there's no sign of when those might come to an end.
Well, this latest news of the Omicron variant has, surprised many of us in the world. How has this influenced the market? How has the market reacted, like local markets and global markets? I believe it had a big impact on them.
Yes, I'm not an economist. I'm an expert in public health, but certainly we've seen a lot of concern because I think we were just hoping to see the light at the end of the tunnel with this pandemic, to say that there are going to be more cases, there are going to be more infections, but the worst is over. But now with the Omicron variant, we can imagine maybe there are going to be additional further waves of infections, even in places that feel like the pandemic's been over, like South Africa, where they've had these major epidemic waves already. And some parts of Europe were having their exit waves with Delta, and now we're most likely going to have more infections with the Omicron variant. And then there's the other part of this is, of course, the travel measures, the travel restrictions, where airlines were ramping up again, going back to pre-COVID normals in some parts of the world. And again, there's now restrictions in place and reductions in travel. And so it's just it's a bump at the end of this bumpy road of the pandemic. And I suppose there could be more bumps in the future as well. But we'll have to see.
Right. Well, I suppose there's a lot of people questioning whether the market reaction to this news was really justified, because there was a massive panic when people didn't really know what was going on. But I wanted to touch a little bit upon the effect of the politicization of this pandemic. In countries like America, it's very polarized. You have your Republicans who pile a lot of the blame on Anthony Fauci and say more people have died of COVID under President Biden than died under Trump, and that's even when they have vaccines and better treatments now. Do you think this hyper-politicization of a health issue is really detrimental to how we tackle this pandemic?
I think it really doesn't help. And it is happening from both sides of the political spectrum, of course, because if you remember back 18 months ago, President Trump ordered a travel ban on China, which we knew at the time wouldn't really make much difference. And then candidate Biden said it was racist and should never be done. And then right now, of course, President Biden has done the travel ban on the southern part of Africa. And it's the Republicans who will brand it as racist and say it's not going to help. And I think there's a lot of measures taken by governments, not only in America, but in other parts of the world, that are maybe efforts taken in what the leaders think are the kind of the best interests of the country. And a lot of people aren't happy with those decisions. With COVID, I think people are getting tired of the public health measures, whether it's travel restrictions or wearing face masks or doing the social distancing. And I think we had the hope that it was going to be coming to an end. But with the Omicron variant, unfortunately, we're going to have to stick in there a little bit longer. We're going to have to persist a little bit longer because I think we are going to see more and more infections with this variant in the coming months. But fingers crossed, though, on average, they're going to be milder. And so there won't be as much pressure on hospitals as there has been in epidemics earlier in the pandemic. And then again, hopefully we'll have these antiviral drugs becoming available all around the world. I'm still waiting to hear when exactly supplies are going to be widely available. And we also talked about the vaccines, the updated vaccines that could be coming in 3 or 4 months. And if we could have booster shots with those, I think that could make a massive difference.
And lastly, before we let you go, Professor Cowling, before this introduction of Omicron variant. South Korea has been shifting into the living with COVID-19 scheme, and we were kind of gradually returning to our normal lives. But with Omicron, and it seems like the introduction of new variants could be inevitable. Does this mean that the pandemic will stay with us, for a longer period of time?
Back to square one.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think it's back to square one. I think we'll have to wait and see how the Omicron variant really plays out, because it may well be that infections are milder in people who've been vaccinated and people who've already been infected. And one thing I would say is I don't think it's possible for somewhere like Korea to go back to the old strategy of trying to minimize the number of infections, because if you go that way, you then still have to think about when you're going to exit that, when you're going to come out of it, when you're going to start again with the living with the virus strategy. But what's going to be important now and in the next maybe 3-4 months over the winter is just managing the caseload. So there's going to be cases in the community. I would say case numbers are likely going to be going up for a while. And what's important is to make sure there's not too many severe cases, not too many hospitalizations, because if hospitals run out of capacity, that's when it is really getting serious, really getting bad. But having a lot of mild cases in the community, maybe there's not enough justification at that point to have a lot of control measures, because we don't do that for flu. We don't do that for other common and mild infections. We do it for COVID because of the fear of what's going to happen with the hospitals and the healthcare system if there's too many severe cases. And with high vaccination coverage in Korea, hopefully that's going to be mitigated.
Well, it hasn't really been mitigated so far. I think ICU beds are at record capacity, and the strain on the health system is something a lot of doctors and nurses are extremely concerned about here in South Korea, but we can only hope for the best. But who knows when we're ever going to see any light at the end of the tunnel, unfortunately. Professor Cowling, thank you ever so much for spending a little bit extra time with us this morning. We really appreciate it. As always, pleasure to hear your insights, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
South Korea's National Security Advisor, Seo Hoon, will meet in the coming hours with a senior Chinese diplomat as South Korea seeks to declare a formal end to the Korean War. Seo travelling to China's northeastern port city of Tianjin for a 2-day trip at the invitation of the Chinese Communist Party's Foreign Affairs Chief Yang Jie-che. South Korea's presidential office says they will exchange opinions on issues of mutual concern. Their agenda will likely include Seoul's push for that declaration, as well as a possible visit to South Korea by Chinese President Xi Jinping. In the coming hours, South Korea and the US will hold their annual Security Consultative meeting in Seoul. At this meeting, also known as SCM, South Korea's Defense Minister Seo Uk will meet with his US counterpart Lloyd Austin, and they're likely to discuss implementing a conditions-based transfer of wartime operational control from Washington to Seoul, which the Allies agreed to do in 2014. They're also expected to address North Korea and various alliance issues. Austin arrived here in Seoul on Wednesday for a 3-day stay. This is the first time Austin has visited South Korea in 8 months.
The OECD expects South Korea's economic growth rate for this year to be 4%. It's same as the OECD's previous forecast in September, even though the organization lowered its projection for other countries. Peunji with the details.
The OECD has kept this year's economic growth outlook for South Korea at the same level, despite lowering its forecast for other countries including the US, China, and Japan. According to its interim economic outlook on Wednesday, Seoul's economy is expected to grow by 4%, the same as September's forecast. The OECD says South Korea's economy continues to recover fast, thanks to eased social distancing measures from a swift vaccination rollout. It said this is expected to boost consumption and employment, notably in the service sector. The OECD also said exports are projected to remain strong through 2023, backed by items such as IT products, machinery, and petrochemicals, but warned that delivery delays from supply bottlenecks and shortages may hamper exports. It added that business investment is set for solid growth, owing to government spending on key industries. As for next year, Korea's economy is expected to grow by 3%, up 0.1 percentage points from its previous forecast. It says South Korea's economic growth is expected to be stable for the next 2 years. For the year 2023, it forecasted the country's GDP to grow 2.7%. The OECD advises the Korean government to financially support low-income households and businesses hit hard by the pandemic, until recovery is well underway, and added that the country needs to step up efforts to supply more housing to stabilize housing prices. 배은지, Arirang News.
The European Commission is rolling out a massive international infrastructure plan dubbed Global Gateway, which aims to mobilize $340 billion in public and private infrastructure investment. The plan announced on Wednesday will invest funds between 2021 and 2027 by pulling together resources of the EU, member states, European financial institutions, and national development finance institutions. The Global Gateway also looks to spread European technology and expertise to developing countries. The move is largely being seen as Europe's effort to challenge China's heavily criticized Belt and Road Initiative.
Hellbound has topped the Netflix most streamed TV show chart for 9 straight days. The South Korean fantasy thriller is getting rave reviews from critics both at home and abroad. Our Kim Bog-yeon gets us better acquainted with this webtoon-based hit show. But be aware, if you haven't watched the series yet, or all of it, I think I'm only on episode number 3, this report may contain spoilers.
It has been just 2 months since the Squid Game craze began, but now another South Korean drama has been topping the Netflix charts. Dark fantasy thriller Hellbound was released on November 19th and within just a few days became the most streamed TV show on Netflix. Wednesday was the show's 9th day at number 1.
CNN says it's the next Squid Game, and The Guardian says it's much more than that. Though people's tastes might vary, it is undeniable that Hellbound is captivating global viewers. Let's find out why it is getting such attention.
Of course, Hellbound may have benefited from the success of Squid Game, which helped direct more attention toward Korean content. However, critics say Hellbound depicts today's postmodernistic society and warns how dangerous a demagogue would be.
We're living in a pandemic era and with a devastating climate crisis soon approaching. The drama warns how aggressive society can be if we do not see disasters for what they are. Strong warnings against unreasonable instigations are shown metaphorically, and the drama depicts the hell society will go through if it becomes postmodernistic.
Critics also praise the use of supernatural creatures as a premise that sparks a reshape of society, along with the director's choice of using the internet as a tool to spread conspiracy theories.
I loved how the Arrowhead movement feels very contemporary, almost satirical. It seemed like it's a mirror of sort of QAnon and the internet's proclivity for sort of conspiracy theories, and how quickly people will attach themselves to just crazy ideas, so long as they're told charismatically, in a way that confirms their fears.
The ending draws a brilliant theological metaphor too. The baby gets the demon's attention, yet survives thanks to human sacrifice, which hints how the baby Jesus brought an end to the Old Testament. Yet critics agree Hellbound would be difficult to generate the kind of craze that Squid Game did, as the elements of the drama aren't easy to copy. Though it is not as simple as South Korea's previous hit series, the beauty of Hellbound is in its complexity. So why don't you give it a shot? Kim Bog-yeon, Arirang News.
Now, it's not just South Korean pop music, TV shows like Squid Game and Hellbound, as well as movies that are becoming more and more popular, kind of like a snowball going down a hill around the world these days. Korean food, and in particular the country's unique chicken dishes, are really taking off in some countries you might not expect. Shin Ye-eun reports.
Korean food is booming in popularity across the world. According to a survey of 8,500 people overseas by the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, more than 70% said they wanted to try out Korean food. And out of those who've tried it, 9 out of 10 said they were satisfied. Their favorite dish turned out to be Korean-style chicken. What makes Korean-style chicken different from other fried chicken is the sauce. The most common recipe is seasoned chicken covered in sauce made of pepper paste, ketchup, sugar, and soy sauce.
A few foreigners I met at a chicken place in Seoul said they could see why it was so popular. So how's the chicken, guys?
It's great, actually.
Amazing.
I trial. Really good.
It's so crispy, juicy. It's one of my favorite foods here in South Korea.
They said it's not just K-chicken that's popular, but Korean food in general.
Before I'm coming to the Korea, I recognized so many foods from K-dramas, K-pop, so through the K-pop. So I think it's gonna be, everyone knows the Korean food, of course.
It was everywhere, so at some point I decided I have to try it, at least to know why everybody is so hype about it. But you know, the Korean spices are unique. Yeah, I think they're just unique. That's why everybody wants to try them.
The head of the Institute of Traditional Korean Food, who has traveled across the world to teach people about Korean food, said she too has noticed its recent popularity.
20 years ago, when I would promote Korean food at different food festivals around the world, nobody knew where South Korea was or what kimchi even was. But now, more foreigners actively look for and attend Korean food festivals.
Amid this trend, Korean cultural centers around the world have launched Korean cooking classes. The Korean Cultural Center in Vietnam has been uploading short 60-second videos that teach viewers how to make the dishes they've seen in Korean movies or dramas.
We first found out which K-drama or K-movie was the most popular in the past 3 years. Then, made videos using ingredients easily available in Vietnam, like how to make the galbi chicken from the movie Extreme Job or noodles cooked with Sprite from the drama Prison Playbook.
With so many Korean dramas and movies showing Korean food, I think it has become even more popular than K-pop. I too wanted to learn how to make Korean food I saw on TV like kimchi stew or Korean-style chicken because it looked good.
Korean food can act as a bridge, giving those living overseas a taste of Korean culture. Shin Ye-eun, Arirang News.
South Korea is now home to one of the world's longest subsea road tunnels. After more than a decade of construction, Poryong Undersea Tunnel has finally opened to the public. Han Seung-woo went to check it out and files us this report.
After more than 4,000 days of construction and $400 million in investment, Poryong Undersea Tunnel on the west coast of South Korea has finally opened to the public, making Chungcheongnam-do Province home to the 5th longest subsea car tunnel in the world.
Where I'm standing is about 5 kilometers from the Poryong end of the tunnel. This is its lowest point, 80 meters below sea level.
A pair of tubes for traffic heading in opposite directions, the 6.9-kilometer tunnel stretches all the way from Daecheon Port to Wonsan-do Island. 5.2 kilometers, or 75% of the whole distance, is buried under the sea. At its opening ceremony on Tuesday, South Korean Prime Minister Kim Boo-kyum congratulated locals on what he believes will transform the region.
The people of Chungcheongnam-do Province have long awaited the age of the West Sea, and I think it's finally here. The opening of the tunnel marks its beginning.
For us, the tunnel is a blessing. With it, we hope Poryong can become a relaxing resort destination where everyone can enjoy the beach and beautiful scenery.
Before the tunnel's construction, it took an hour and a half to drive from Boryong City's Daecheon Beach to Taeangun County's Yeongmok Port. Now, the distance has been cut by 81 kilometers, turning that journey into a 10-minute drive. Chungcheongnam-do Province hopes this can help take the region's tourist industry to new heights.
The province is planning to invest over $7 billion into 61 projects, with the goal of attracting 40 million tourists to the area in 2025.
The opening of Boryong Undersea Tunnel completes National Route 77, and the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport expects this to greatly contribute to the smoother distribution of goods across the country. Han Sung-woo, Arirang News, Boryong.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. 4 people were injured near a bridge close to Munich's busy main train station on Wednesday after an old wartime bomb exploded. Police say the explosion happened as the site was being drilled to build a tunnel. The blast resulted in rail travel to and from the main train station being suspended. World War II bombs are often discovered during construction work in Germany and are usually defused by experts or destroyed in controlled explosions. In fact, more than 2,000 tons of live bombs and munitions are discovered each year, more than 70 years after the end of the Second World War. British and American warplanes devastated the country by dropping 1.5 million tons of bombs during the war. Officials estimate 15% of the bombs failed to explode, with some buried 6 meters deep in the ground. Germany has previously reported deadly explosions due to buried bombs, including in 2014, when a construction worker was killed when his power shovel struck the device. With looming tax hikes and high share prices, CEOs and corporate insiders have sold a record $69 billion in stocks this year. According to Insider Score, CEOs, founders, and insiders have been cashing out at the highest pace on record, up 30% from 2020 as of Monday. Experts say selling is likely to increase even more as December is usually an active month for sales due to tax planning. However, while some market watchers see insider selling as a major warning sign, many of the stocks sold by these insiders, including Tesla and Amazon, have continued to surge after the selling. In addition, while higher federal tax for super earners may have contributed to the recent rise in selling, some say the biggest factor driving up the sales totals is the high stock valuations. Archaeologists in Peru have unearthed a well-preserved mummy that is estimated to be at least 800 years old. The pre-Incan mummy was discovered at the archaeological complex of Cajamarquilla, located east of Lima, and is presumed to be from the pre-Inca Xicala culture. Experts say while the exact age of the mummy is unknown, it could be between 800 to 1,200 years old, with further carbon dating to be carried out. What's fascinated archaeologists is that the mummy was found in the fetal position, tied with ropes in an oval underground funerary structure. It was also surrounded by various offerings, including pots, ceramics, and gourds containing botanical remains. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Good morning. Most of Korea is flirting with sub-zero temperatures this morning, so dress warmer than yesterday. Speaking of which, what a start to December. Yesterday it was really cold along with sharp winds all day. Well, winds will die down a bit today with a slight rise in our highs, but stay bundled up. There will be a few passing clouds today, then there could be light rain or snow in central parts of the country, Jeollado and Jeju Island, while the East Coast is under dry weather advisory again. Well, taking a closer look at our temperatures now, morning lows in most parts dived below zero, and even Daegu and Busan had freezing temperatures at -3 and -1 degrees Celsius this morning, respectively. The highs will go up slightly higher than yesterday, but still a couple of degrees below seasonal norms. Daegu and Gwangju will be going up to 8 degrees Celsius this afternoon. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
And that's all we have for now, but we'll be back at 8 a.m. Korea time on Friday for our next edition of New Day at Arirang. We appreciate you tuning in. I'm Kim Mo-gyan.
Yes, thank you for joining us. We'll be here at the same time tomorrow, as Mo-gyan just said, and I'll be back on my own at 10 a.m. Korea time with our next newscast. Until next time, goodbye.